Welcome to the Salesman Podcast, where we interview the world's leading influence, body language, psychology, and sales experts to give you the information you need to close more deals and make more money. Additionally, for sales humor, tutorials, and entertainment, type salesman.red into your browser and come visit the world's largest community of millennial salespeople today. This episode of the Salesman Podcast is sponsored by Salesforce.com. Salesforce.com allows you to sell smarter and faster from anywhere in the world with the world's _1 CRM system. Close more deals, get more leads, and make more insightful decisions today by going to salesman.red/Salesforce to get started. Hello Sales Nation, I am your host Will Barron and welcome to another episode of the Salesman Podcast. On today's show, we have Gavin Ingham, and we're discussing how your attitudes and your belief system affects your performance within the world of sales. I asked Gavin if he thinks salespeople in general are ballsy enough, or if that's something that needs to be worked on, and what the limiting factors are within sales and people's mindsets. Gavin is an expert in mental toughness, he's a keynote speaker, and he's the author of 3 books, and he does a lot of sales consulting and that kind of thing, so he's really knowledgeable in this area. He recommends a whole bunch of books which can be found in the show notes at salesman.red. And with that said, without further ado, let's jump into today's show. Hi Gavin, and welcome to the Salesman Show.
Hi Will.
We're going to jump in straight with the questions because I know you've got a lot of knowledge that the audience are going to lap up. So today we're going to start by talking about mental toughness in sales, which is what you're obviously an expert in. And let's put things in perspective here. For the top superstar salesman, what percentage of their success do you reckon is mindset and attitude versus what percentage of it do you reckon is like physical selling skills?
That's a great question, Will. You know, I've been doing this now for about 15 years, something like that, working with people all around the country and all around the world. And I've always asked them the question, what is it that makes a great salesperson? What is it that makes a sales superstar, if you like? And they come back with answers like someone who's motivated, determined, enthusiastic, persistent, somebody who's got willpower, someone who's got charisma. And they give me this list. And then I say to them, so what percentage of that would you say is attitudes? What percentage would you say is skills? And the interesting thing in that is I think the lowest answer I've ever had from anybody was, well, 50-50. And I think the highest answer was, well, 100% attitude, 0% skill. Clearly, it's not 100% attitude, 0% skill, is it? Because that would make you a totally motivated idiot, you know. And we see enough of those on the X Factor, people who think they've got it, people who think it's all about passion, but actually they can't sing. And I think when you relate that to sales, we probably all know someone like that, someone who runs around like a headless chicken. I think the answer we usually come back on is something like about 80-20. But you know what? In a way, as in 80% attitude, 20% skill. Mm-hmm. But in a way, I don't necessarily think the percentage is worth getting hung up on, because I think the two work intrinsically together. So if you like to look at it one way, it's that attitude is your ability to access your skill. So attitude is your ability to access your skill. And I'll give you an example. Probably about 12, 13 years ago, I spent a lot of time sitting with people when they were on the phone with new clients or existing clients. And you'd be sitting with somebody doing some desk side coaching, and somebody would make a call and the client would give you some old objection, you know, like, can you send me literature? I guess these days they'd say, can you send me an email, wouldn't they? The salesperson would go, yeah, I'll do that. I'll send you some literature. And can I give you a call next week? And the client go, yeah, give me a call next week. And they'd put the phone down and you'd say to them, okay, how did that call go? And they say, pretty well. And you go, great. And because I was a trained coach, the next question I'd ask would be, well, what did you do well? And they'd tell me what they did well. And then I'd say, okay, are there any areas that you think you could improve? And they say, well, maybe that objection, I could, the send me literature one. And I'd sort of say, you think? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, okay, great. So what could you have done? And it was this bit that always amazed me, Will, because I expected them to say, I have no idea, Gavin. But they'd say something like, well, I could have said, I could happily send you literature, but our literature is a bit generic. So what I'd rather do is ask you a few questions, find out about your business, and then tailor some literature to suit your needs, or then come down and see you, or whatever, you know. And I'd sit there and I'd think, wow, it might not have been what I would have said, but that would have probably worked. So why didn't they ask it? And the answer, of course, is attitude is your ability to access your skill. And they'd already decided, you know what, actually, I don't think I'm going to win this. I don't think I'm going to get there. I think this guy's going to reject me or this girl's going to reject me no matter what I do. So hence they give up and they don't employ the skills that they've got. And you see this time after time. You see it in negotiations, you see it in presentations, you see it in face-to-face meetings. You even see it in the way people plan their days. You know, they all know they ought to plan, but they don't do it. Why not? Well, it's not skill, is it? Because they know how to do that. It's something to do with mindset and actually having the mental toughness and the mental approach that actually helps you deliver consistently on your skills.
Okay, so going to that phone example then, because that's a great one. Is that they're not being ballsy enough and they're not just pushing themselves? Or is it that they're not believing in the product enough, that they are easier to shrug off than what they should be?
Well, that's a great question, because I think it's both, or it may well be both. Because I think when I talk about mental toughness, one of the first things I always talk about is attitude. So it's having the right mental attitude, because we know, emotion drives behavior. And our attitude affects our ability to access our skills. So I like to measure attitude on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the least appropriate attitude and 10 is the right attitude. No, I don't say motivated, unmotivated, because motivated might not be the right attitude. If you're dealing with, a complaint, a 10 might be empathetic and understanding. Whereas if it's cold calling, it could be motivated and enthusiastic. And if it's a meeting, it could be caring, understanding, consultative. But we need to be at a 10. That attitude affects our ability to access our skills. So I think the first thing is you need that attitude. But the next question then is, well, where does that attitude come from? And I think you're quite right. A lot of the time it comes from belief. So whilst we can fake an attitude for a while, a bit like Anthony Robbins says, fake it till you make it, act as if type thing. Ultimately, if you don't believe, or if you've got some limiting beliefs that are affecting you, then that's going to affect your ability to be able to consistently have the right attitude. So to take another example, let's assume that somebody believes that their product is overpriced. They believe that they're not competitive in the marketplace. They believe the product's good, but it's maybe not worth what it is they're being asked to charge for it. And they have the latitude to be able to negotiate. What happens, of course, is as soon as they say, well, it's £1,000 or whatever, they don't feel great about it because they already believe that they're probably going to get negotiated because they believe they're being a little bit cheeky or something like that. And as they say it, probably they already demonstrate to the client in their voice or in their words that they're prepared to negotiate. So they might say, for example, well, Will, our standard price, which is basically saying, look, here, I'll negotiate. But in any case, the client probably will try and negotiate. And as soon as the client tries to negotiate, the salesperson's little voice, based on their belief, says to them, oh, here we go again. Here we flipping go again. And they immediately start to go 10, 9, 8, 7 and drop down the scale. And as soon as they do that, they either don't access or don't access properly the negotiation skills that they've got. So they might know things about walkaway prices. They might know that they've got a trade concessions. They might know that a whole variety of things about negotiation, but they don't do it. And the reason they don't do it is because they don't believe. And of course, the irony here is as soon as they negotiate and agree a negotiated fee, they tend to then see what they believe rather than believing what they see. So nobody walks away from that negotiation going, you know what, actually, I walked in with a limiting belief. When that client tried to negotiate with me, I felt negative. I didn't therefore access the skills I've got, and I've created this. They actually walk away and they say to themselves, see, I knew it. Nobody wants to pay that price. This product is overpriced. So what they effectively do is reinforce that limiting belief about the price or about whatever it is that we're talking about. So in answer to your question, in short, both.
Okay, so limiting beliefs is something that fascinates me, and I've read Tony Robbins' work on this kind of stuff, and some of his work is a bit like abstract and not for everyone. What do you do in this scenario, Gavin? Because salesmen believing that their products are overpriced and that they'd be more competitive, and basically, to me, it seems like an excuse if most of the time when people are saying that. But what would you do if you were put in that scenario of training someone who believed that the product was overpriced when the market and management believed otherwise?
Okay, well, there's no simple, hard and fast answer here, because if you're in a one-to-one scenario, so if you were working with, I do a little bit of one-to-one work with more senior people, and if you find that they've got a limiting belief, there are techniques and strategies for actually questioning and actually removing those beliefs in general conversation, or challenging those beliefs in general conversation. So I can input some of that into motivational talks, but you can't do it on a one-to-one level. Generally speaking, if you look at a belief is formed. Nobody really knows exactly how, but there's sort of conjecture that it's three things. So one is repetition. So if you hear something over and over and over again, you're likely to believe it. So that kind of explains why a lot of us have beliefs from childhood and that sort of thing. But it also explains the sales situation, because if you ring lots of clients and they all say to you, that's too expensive, that's too expensive, that's too expensive, guess what you start to believe? The second thing, I guess, is authority. So if you believe someone has authority, then you're more likely to believe what they have to say. And again, kind of has authority over you, because they determine whether you make a sale or not. And then the third one is emotional intensity, which ironically also applies here, because if you need that client to buy that product for you to make target and they don't, there's quite a lot of emotional intensity goes with that. So there are some areas where limiting beliefs tend to turn up for salespeople. So as a group, what I tend to do with people is I get them first to understand what a limiting belief is, because I think the first part is awareness. You need to be aware of the fact that limiting beliefs are generally driving you. You need to understand the process that we've just talked through, so that you actually realize, well, you know what, it's not my territory that's wrong, it's my belief about that territory. It's not the price that's wrong, it's my belief about that price. It's not, etc. I think what we then do is we do a kind of a brainstorm, if you like, around what are all the limiting beliefs. So we talk about what are all the limiting beliefs that salespeople could have. So you start to have an awareness of what specific limiting beliefs are out there and how they apply to selling. The next step that you would then sort of look at is you'd start thinking about people you know and situations when you've seen that. Not yourself at that stage, but just being aware that those things aren't out there. I think the big question for individuals then is when you find yourself in a less than resourceful situation. So let's take a specific example. You're about to do a sales presentation and you feel incredibly nervous. The first step is you've got to be aware that you feel nervous. You've got to actually stop and go, you know what, I'm not in the right state of mind here. What is this mindset that I've got on? Actually, you know what, I feel nervous. And then you ask yourself a simple question. What is it I believe that's causing me to feel nervous? Now, if you can retrieve that information, i.e. you can go, well, you know what, I think they're going to laugh at me, or you know what, I don't think they want to see me, or you know what, whatever. You can then start to actually mentally wrestle this thing down by asking yourself a series of questions to actually start to go, well, actually, that's not necessarily true. Once you've started to do that, you need to decide what you want to believe, and then you look for evidence to support that. So let's say, for example, you wanted to believe that basically every client was difficult, challenging, wanted to give you the runaround and wanted everything as cheap as possible. You could definitely find examples that would support that to help you believe that. On the other hand, if you wanted to believe there were clients out there who wanted to work in partnership with you, who saw value in what you did and wanted you to be consultative and help them, then again, you could find examples to support that. So I think at that point, what people have to do is decide what they need to believe to succeed and then look for evidence to support that. Ultimately, what happens is we don't tend to have control over this stuff. And because we don't have control over it, then we just kind of pick the beliefs up. And they tend to be the beliefs of the people you spend the most time with. So it's really interesting that when you can go into two organizations that virtually sell the same thing. Say, for example, let's take a random example of resellers. I did a piece of work years ago now, but with two resellers who were selling the same product. And because they were selling the same product, it was getting delivered from the same price with the same support. So the only difference was that you work for one company or you work for the other. One company, there was this inherent belief that they were overcharging. The other company believed that they had massive value and were charging more. The irony here being they're selling the same product with the same service. So that belief is massive, but of course it's being reinforced by the people who are around them.
For sure. I think awareness is mega important, and I think a lot of people will go through not just the sales careers, but their life of just not being aware that a lot of what they do day to day is triggered by different things that they're not necessarily choosing to put into their head. But moving on to the motivational speaking side of things now, Gavin. So obviously you're on stage, you're getting people riled up, and you're developing change into them. What tips or what strategies do you use that salespeople could perhaps use in sales presentations to get prospects excited about their products?
Gosh, that's a good question. I don't think I've been asked that one specifically ever like that before. So I'm going to have to think about it. The first one is planning and preparation. So whilst, I have, if you looked at my talks and you followed me around, you'd probably see that in a first talk for an organization, I've probably only got 2 or 3 genuine first talks for an organization at a conference. Because ultimately, in a first touch, there's certain, if you like, basic pieces of material that just make the most sense in most scenarios. So 2 or 3 talks will cover everything. That talk, however, will change, but it probably about 25%. So about 75% will remain set, but the other 25% will change. And to change that, I do a lot of planning and preparation. So I'm not planning and preparation as such around how do I make a great speech or what do I say, because I kind of know that. I'm planning and preparing around how is this relevant to this organization. And one of the reasons I do that is because I want to pace where they're at. So what I mean by that is when I start a conversation in a talk, I want people who are out there listening to think, yeah, he's me too. I've been there. I've had that. I've explained that. So the case studies and the examples and the stories I pick need to engage those people straight away. They need to pace them. They need to go, got it. I'm there too, because then they listen to the solutions that you're bringing in. So for me, planning and preparation, a huge piece, which leads into pacing. I also do quite a lot of stuff from something called the format principle. And format, I'm pretty sure the girl's name was Bernice McCarthy, but if that's wrong, I apologize. It was a system which she created. And one of the things she talks about is why. And that's why do people need to listen to you? And I've always been quite big on that, particularly in corporate, because I think a lot of trainers and speakers, they're talking to people in the personal development arena who've paid for themselves. So they know why they're there. They know what they want. Yeah. But I walk in to give a speech, and frankly, probably half the audience don't want to be there. They don't want to be at the conference. They're not interested. And now they're having their time wasted by a motivational speaker as well. So I've got to get them on why quite early. I've got to get them engaged so that they sit there and think, why is this relevant to me? Now, bringing that, and I think the final thing then is passion and genuine and authentic, which I hope, has already come through, like you with your podcast and like the conversation we had before. It's all about being yourself. People want to buy you as an individual. So bringing that across to sales, I think a lot of people don't do enough planning, preparation, presentation. They just don't. They don't do enough planning preparation about how they're going to approach it, what they're going to do, and what's relevant. The second thing is, I don't think they ask themselves why that client should engage. So they don't have enough stuff at the start to engage that client. So it becomes this kind of one-way pitch from them to the client rather than something that actually engages the client and actually gets them involved and talking and thinking, sure, this is of interest. And I don't think enough thought is put into that. The third one is that a lot of people then put this kind of hat on of, I'm making a presentation, it has to be formal,
definitely.
And here's my PowerPoint slides, and this is what I have to do. And I just thought, oh, God, it's awful, because clients are looking for something to engage with. And I think at this point it's worth noting that I'm going to separate out here what I would call true selling things and kind of bidding to tender type stuff. Because I think a lot of salespeople, there's a difference between me reaching out and having a conversation with you where we've got some interest and I turn up to do a presentation, and me actually picking up, an ITT, having never spoken to anybody who's on that situation, not really knowing, and they've got 10 people turning up. Because I think in those scenarios, sometimes the clients just don't want to engage. They don't want to be involved. So I think it's worth pointing out that they, even though I still think you have to be authentic and genuine, they are different, and I would have a different set of principles for dealing with those. So I'm thinking more when you've actually had a conversation and you've actually somewhere in a sales process, rather than just turning up for a bid to tender where nobody wants you to be. They can be slightly different, those two.
For sure. Okay, so what you touched on then, Gavin, of the corporate head in presentations and being on the phone, that bores everyone to tears. And I think that's really important, that salespeople, and I think over time this is going to become more and more important, if salespeople need to become an individual, and companies are dealing with individuals versus I'm dealing with Will from wherever. And that leads me on to
Can I just jump?
question.
Can I just jump in before we do that question? There's a guy.
Yeah, of course you can.
There's a book I read a long time ago now, and I can't even remember who the guy was, and I can't even remember what the percentage was. At which point you're going to say, "Why are you telling me?" And you know what? It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to make the percentages up. and what this guy, he was talking about being, in fact, I think it was Bob Bly, B-L-Y, I think. And I think the book was called something like How to Become a Recognized Authority in 90 Days. It would be dated, this book now. But what was interesting, he was talking about the importance of being an authority. And one of the things he said, which stuck with me, was he said, well, you need to be an expert. You need to be yourself. You need to be genuine. You need a message. You need to be an original, if you're not something boring, not a carbon copy of yourself. And he said, if you do that, there will be a percentage. Let's say 25. There will be a 20. He may have said 20, but there'll be a percentage, 25% of people who absolutely love what you do. They become raving fans, and they will run through fire for you. Like the people who are faithfuls on your podcasts. You then have 25% of people who hate what you do. They won't listen, they don't like it, and given a chance, they would also take you to task on it. So they would pick you up for being too informal. They would pick you up for maybe using the wrong grammar, or perhaps being too loose in the way you approach it, or whatever. And then there'll be a group of people in the middle, 50, 60%, who are kind of indifferent. They like you, they think it's good, but they're not. They'd watch you quite happily, but they're not really interested either way. And what Bob said was that this top 20%, this top 25% will make you richer than your wildest dreams. And if you go for this middle percentage and you go, okay, well, let's try and move some of these people off this bottom lot, and let's try and increase these people in the top lot, all you end up doing is getting more people in the middle. And when you get more people in the middle, you can't win, because you don't actually have any raving fans. You don't actually have anybody buys into you. You've just got loads of people who see you as another company. And at that point, you can't really connect with them. You can't really ask the difficult questions. You can't really challenge with them. You can't really let loose, and you can't really add the value that you want. And I read this, as I say, probably 20 years ago now, 15 years ago, and I thought, that's interesting, but I didn't think any more about it. But then as I was kind of going through life, I thought, well, you know what, actually, this isn't just about being an authority. This is everywhere. Think of a band that you are passionate about. For every band that you're passionate about, there's a whole load of people who are not passionate about it, and there's a whole load of people who hate it. But it doesn't matter, because they made a fortune out of that top 20% or whatever. Think politicians. There's various politicians who've swept to power, some of whom I hated, even at the moment they swept to power, and yet enough people loved them. You could do the same with comedians. I could name 5 comedians. You'd probably hate one of them, but it doesn't matter. Hey, if we wanted to be in the moment right now, although I don't know that this is a great example, because I'm not sure how many people are in the middle, but we could immediately go Jeremy Clarkson, could we not? There's a group of people who absolutely love him and apparently are threatening the BBC head of the BBC that they're going to kill him because they want him back on telly. And there's a bunch of people who don't even care. They're just slagging him off, and they wish he'd go away and shrivel up in a corner somewhere. So, but you know what? Jeremy doesn't care, because Jeremy has got one of the most syndicated TV shows around the world ever, and has made a fortune out of it. Why? Off those people who absolutely love him. Why? Because people who watch him know he's himself, and some people hate him for that, and some people love him with him for that. And you know what? I reckon he's okay with that, because he knows that if he tried to be everything to everybody, he would be one of those other TV channels, one of those other sports shows, or one of those other car shows that never really made it. It was just a okay program, but there was nothing genuine about it. And I think I agree with you. I think as everything flattens out and the business gets bigger, et cetera, and people have more and more choice, I think to make a real difference, you've got to be able to inject that individual personality into it.
Well, sure. Well, this is literally what I was going to ask you, Gavin, of where do you see sales changing in the next 5 years? So I feel that as things flatten, as you can get something from China as easy as you can get it from the local business down the road, it's not going to be necessarily where you're buying it from. It's going to be who you're buying it from, B2B, that's going to make the difference. How do you see things changing over the next decade?
Can I just say yes? I totally agree with you. I think I did an interesting piece of consultancy a few years ago, and it was with a client in engineering who was being, shall we say, inverted commas, threatened by sort of Chinese imports and things like that. And they were bringing their products to market for about 25% of the price of what they were able to. And the client, the MD, he rang me and he said, look, I've got an issue. I've got these sales directors and these sales managers and things. And we've got this huge product potential order file. We might be running into, say, let's say there was 100 million on it or 200 million on it. We take 100 million because it's a nice figure to work with. We know we're probably going to do 10 million, i.e. a tenth of these. Problem is, we don't know which. And we kind of set to work on this stuff, and I was asking questions and speaking with people. And what became really, really clear is they hadn't made this distinction. So you'd ask the question, well, what about this client? And they go, well, I think they're going to go with it. And you go, think? And they'd go, well, yeah, I mean, the conversation seemed to go quite well. And you go, okay, quite well. And then they'd say, well, yeah, I mean, because we're better, right? I mean, we're in Britain and our product's slightly better. And I go, okay, let's just accept it is for a moment. Has this client gone out to China? Oh, yeah, he's gone out to China. Well, clearly he doesn't feel the same then, does he? Because, well, no, I think he's just gone to look. No one gets on a plane to go out to China to just look. You're not being honest with yourself here. And I think the reality was that there were certain clients, and as there are with everything, there are certain clients who just don't care. They will buy the cheapest irrespective. They will go to wherever and they will do whatever. But there will always be a group who will recognize the value that an individual can add. And those people will be prepared to pay more to do that. But making assumptions about why that is and who that is huge, is a real problem. It's got to be through a proper sales process. And this is where I think we have problems, because you look at a lot of salespeople and how they now do business, and they meet somebody on social media or on LinkedIn or something like that. Then they have a whole load of emails go backwards and forwards, and then they make some kind of proposal. Meanwhile, the client has asked somebody in India, China, Australia, Singapore, wherever, for a proposal, and the client sits looking at 3 proposals. Now, they may look at one as going, well, that's British. That might be in my head slightly better, but the question is, how much better? Is that worth 5%, 10%? And my argument would be that only by actually really having a conversation with that client, really understanding what's important to that client, really understanding that client's business in a way that someone who maybe doesn't speak the language as well, maybe somebody who is in another country and cannot get face-to-face, someone who cannot have that conversation or doesn't even have the attitude and the sales skills to have that conversation, you can actually find out what really, really adds value for them. I talk about in one of my talks a scenario I had, and I've got actually an atrial fibrillation, which is a kind of an arrhythmia on my heart, and it goes, it's nothing serious, but it goes out a beat every now and then. And maybe 10 years ago, I was looking to have an operation, and I went private. And the reason I went private doesn't matter, but there were reasons, and it cost me five figures to do this. And I was in the hospital for less than a day, so I didn't even stay overnight. I was there for a few hours. And I was talking about this and to an audience, and 80% of the audience went, you could have had it done for nothing. And I said, yeah, but I didn't want to. And they said, but it would have been the same doctor. Where did he come from? I said, oh, yeah, for sure. He was up at the local massive, NHS hospital, and he came down. But to me, and it doesn't matter why, but to me, the value of spending it and do it private was worth the money. But it was clearly obvious that to 90% of the audience, it wasn't, or without being asked the right questions, or without thinking about it, it wasn't. And I think that's the key here. The key is I actually, much unlike what a lot of the people who social media and whatever said, I actually think the individual is going to become more and more important, because I think as more and more stuff gets automated, as more and more stuff gets possible to do online, certain group of people will really respect the value that an individual can bring. There's 2 things here, though. First, you've got to be able to find these people. And second, you genuinely have to add value, which brings me back to my first point, which is honesty. I think a lot of people are just not honest with themselves, and they like to think they add value. They like to think they're a great singer, but actually they're not, and they don't. And I think that's when you come back to skills, because I think you need really great sales skills. You need really great questioning skills. You need to really understand their business. You need to really understand them individually. You need the ability to actually have a conversation to open them up to get into that. And you need the ability to be able to demonstrate how you genuinely add value so that they look at it and go, that is worth the extra. And I think that's the opportunity, but it's also the threat for a lot of salespeople who think they can just compete on a level playing field, because they can't. They've got to compete on a different playing field.
Mm-hmm. But I see that as a really positive thing for salespeople.
Me too.
Because if you were good, you make the effort, you build those connections. Well, one, it makes you practically unsackable because the customers will go with you wherever you go, which is a total change and a shift in the world of corporate selling. I just like the empowerment there, that you're almost becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, we've been here before. I a certain percentage, not a huge percentage now. It's probably about 5%. But one of the industries that I had quite a lot to do with was recruitment, and the reason for that was I did some recruitment at one point. And when I was recruitment back in the day, they started advertising job vacancies on Channel 4 on CFAX, not CFAX, teletext or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And you'd fax them in overnight and they'd turn up on teletext. And about that period, was a site came online called JobServe, and JobServe gave you the ability to post. And people at that point were saying job boards will kill recruiters. And I said, no, they won't. They just make everything faster and easier, but they don't remove the basic problem, because the basic problem is there either aren't any staff, at which point you can advertise on job boards all you like and you won't get any decent applicants, or there's too many applicants, at which point you can advertise all you like, but some bugger has to interview them. Some bugger's got to work out the wheat from the chaff. Now, all right, if you want to pay people to do that in your own organization, great, but that's not a job board. That's actually paying somebody to use that job board. You're effectively bringing a recruiter in-house. But the challenge for recruiters, as you quite rightly say in that scenario, which is exactly the same as the challenge for salespeople. If you thought your job was advertising on a job board, grabbing a few CVs, sending them through to the client, then you actually weren't adding any value in the first place. If, on the other hand, you add some huge value through that process, then you become more and more and more valuable to a certain type of client. And that is exactly the same in every other field. I think the opportunity actually is huge, but I think you have to be adding value. And that's the critical thing. And I think people need to be asking, how do I add value? What is it I really do? What is it I really bring to this party? What is it that this client could not do without? What is it this client's going to pay extra for? How do I become a consultant to this client? How does this client see me as someone who works in partnership with them? Genuinely, not the usual sort of, oh, well, I do this and I do that. And this is great, genuinely, from their perspective. And I think a lot of salespeople have never asked that question, and they haven't worked hard enough on actually delivering on that.
Yeah, love it, Gavin. Love it. Gavin, what is one book that you'd recommend to the upgraded salesman audience? So it doesn't have to be necessarily selling, because we've covered a lot of ground here, but mindset, perhaps. What's one book that you'd recommend?
Wow, there are so many. What would I recommend? I really like, based on the conversation that we've had, I don't think you can go wrong with Anthony Robbins stuff, something like Unlimited Power. I really like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. I think that's a great book. And I think from a perspective of actually working maybe in a slightly different direction, there's some really great stuff on sort of body language and stuff like that. One of my favorite books, although it's a bit complicated, is Detecting Lies and Deceit by Albert Bridge, which has absolutely nothing to do with anything we've been talking about, but it's a great book. Do you know what? I think there's quite a lot of people who've written some quite good books recently. Willpower by Roy Baumeister, I think, and John Tierney is a really great book, actually. Very, very interesting. So there's a lot of great stuff out there. Difficult to choose.
On that, Gavin, how valuable do you think it is for salespeople to read books? Because I know a lot of them don't, and I didn't until like 4 or 5 years ago. So, do you think it's a good use of a salesperson's time?
Well, yes.
To be reading books?
Yeah, if I could take a photo behind me, I've got about 1,000 books in a bookshelf behind me, which are all sales, mindset. So I think it's incredibly important. Having said that, I really liked reading. I like reading, so it suits me. So I think if you're the kind of person who likes reading, read. Having said that, I think if it's going to be like a millstone around your neck and people are sitting out there thinking, oh, here we go again. And, ironically, I think that will be quite a large percentage of your audience because they've chosen to listen by podcast. So maybe they're not going to be that comfortable with reading. And if that's the case, I'd say stay subscribed to this podcast. Maybe go and find another one that you like or something like that, because I think there are many different ways. Go on YouTube, watch some videos. There's some great stuff on YouTube. I was doing a course the other year and I went for a search on YouTube just to see if I could find something. And I found a whole summer class from from a Harvard summer class. We're talking about 60 hours worth of stuff that somebody paid thousands for, and they just uploaded the whole lot onto YouTube, and it was there, like 60 videos of an hour each, and it was the full thing, as if you've been sitting there, and it was totally free. And I haven't even finished them all yet, but I'm kind of working my way through it. So there's lots and lots and lots of stuff out there. Funnily enough, as we're having this conversation, I've just turned around, and again, nothing to do with mindset, but one book that I loved has just jumped out and punched me in the face, actually, as I turned around, and I thought I must say that. And it's it's not even that salesy. It's Pitch Anything by Oren Klaff. That's a great book.
Amazing stuff. We'll link to all them in the show notes for everyone who's listening and at the gym or driving the car. And I've got one final question for you, Gavin. That's something I've asked everyone that's come on the show so far. And if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become a better salesperson?
I'm going to have to say two, I think. Spend more time working out how you really add value for the clients that you actually want, and then focus on delivering that with an absolute passion. And the reason I'd say that is I think a lot of salespeople, by virtue of how we start our jobs or our roles in sales, we start immediately with a target. We start immediately having to hit the floor running. And because of that, we just get used to chasing any old business. And I think whilst that might be what you need to do to get you started, if you've been in sales a while and you're all right, you need to be thinking about the business you want and how you add value for those people, not necessarily the business that you've got. Because I think if it's like that phrase, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And I'd flip that on its head and say, if you behave in the way you have been doing for the last 2 years, you're going to get the same results. If you want to get a different result, you've got to work out what the behavior is and how you add value for your clients to actually achieve that. Because just trying to work harder, just trying to work faster is going to burn you out and isn't going to get you the results you want.
Amazing stuff, Gavin. Well, we've mentioned that you're a motivational speaker, that you're involved with sales and training and all that. Tell us a little bit more about your website, because it's got an excellent blog, excellent newsletter, and I know people listening are going to want to know more about you.
Sure. I'm a motivational speaker, for want of a better word. I talk on mental toughness, specifically for salespeople, but also for business people. Generally doing 1 to 2 to 3 hours with a group of people, either at a conference or an away day or something like that. And what we do is we aim to have them leave feeling buzzed up, feeling ready, having challenged their limiting beliefs, if you like, but also then underpinning a handful of core specific behaviors that they can do to actually bring that alive for them. So I don't want it to be a sort of a buffet where they feel hungry afterwards. I want it to be a buffet, but then with some instructions for how they can keep that buffet going if they choose to. Typically on the website, you can find some examples of that, and you can get a feel for the talks that I do. But also, as you quite rightly say, you've got my blog, which is dead hard to find because it's gaviningham.com/blog. And on there, I post my thoughts, articles, feelings. And I would say to people, go and join the newsletter as well, which you'll find on the website. I post a newsletter probably once every couple of weeks, and it's I'm not going to say it's always motivational, because that's not my thing to say, but people say it's motivational, it makes them think, and certainly when you're thinking about, well, what should we be reading, you should certainly be reading my newsletter, would be my opinion.
Amazing stuff, Gavin. Well, look, you've given a lot of value today. I really appreciate it. I know the audience will as well. And I want to thank you for your time, and thank you for coming on the Salesman Show.
No problem. Enjoyed it. Thank you.